Welcome to the first ULI Trends podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Grasso. This podcast series is intended to be a lead up of key topics and themes in our industry to ULI's annual Trends Conference, hosted on November 12th this year at the Hyatt Regency in downtown Salt Lake City. Today's series will focus on affordable housing in Utah with Salt Lake City Councilmember Victoria Petro and Blaser Ventures founder and president Brandon Blaser. Welcome, Victoria and Brandon. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having us.
Victoria, maybe you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Victoria Petro. I represent the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City, which for residences is the Rose Park, Fair Park, Jordan Meadows, and West Point area. I also have the airport, a lot of the the inland port area. And I've been there since 21, currently seeking re-election, and I love nerding out on housing policy.
Well, happy to have you here today. Brandon, maybe introduce yourself a little bit as well.
Brandon Blaser with Blaser Ventures, which is my own investment development firm, founded about 7 years ago, focused really here in Salt Lake City. We do urban mixed use, affordable housing, and industrial. Affordable housing is something that's a real mainstay of what we're trying to accomplish. We've personally dedicated that 20 to 30% of what we do as a firm will have an affordability component to it. I like to say a lot of that comes from my early days of family business growing up was in what I call the OG of affordable housing, manufactured housing. So this is something that, I learned very early on from my dad that there's a certain satisfaction of getting someone in a home that otherwise couldn't afford it. And I think it's something that we as a community, especially the development community, need to put on the forefront of everything that we're doing as we push forward in Salt Lake City's growth.
Well, thank you for being a leader on the private side to push this forward. It's very much needed in our community. Before we kick off into discussion, I wanted to serve up a few facts so our listeners can understand the importance and timeliness of the issue. Utah is short 70,000 dwelling units of supply equilibrium across the state. Salt Lake City now has the fourth largest relative spread in the country from renting to home ownership. Utah has been the fastest growing state in the country since 2010 with an above average household size. And over the last decade, on average in Salt Lake County, home prices have appreciated about 90%, while apartment rents have appreciated about 64%. So with that setting the plate, let's dive into the conversation. Victoria, as a champion of affordable housing, can you please help explain to us what is the current need in Utah for affordable housing?
The need is dire. So as someone who represents a historically redlined area, we have not just a dearth of housing for the deeply affordable, for the people we're seeing who are on the streets trying to break the cycle of things like homelessness, but at this point, we don't even have housing for teachers. Our firefighters are finding it difficult. And so the need is dire, and it has to be a both and approach. While there is an element of the supply and demand, and a market correction will happen when the supply more accurately meets the demand, there are also the people who are alive right now who can't wait for that market correction. So it has to be both correcting that differential between the supply and the demand and making sure that the people who are living through us trying to correct that have places to call home.
What state and municipal programs are there to support this need from both the public and public-private partnership perspectives?
So we're in the last week of the legislative session, so I'm a little traumatized and can't really talk about state policy without twitching too much, but it's a constant conversation. We know that Steve Waldrop is leading a statewide strategy, and we're trying to do all sorts of things that I don't always agree with. Like, I don't know that I love developer infrastructure districts. I think public funds should be through public entities. But it's a strategy that we're testing out to see if it can enable quicker manufacturing. And then there's also things like, first-time homeowners incentives and things like that. I never like preemption, so we fought those back. At the city level, and in Salt Lake City in particular, we are doing that both and approach. We have taken about $20 million a year since I've been there for a total of around $60 million that we've directly invested into entitled units. So you'll see this year the Spark in my district, the Spark project, that will go from 20 to 80% AMI with units that range from studio all the way up to 4-bedroom. And included in there, there'll be childcare centers and it's mixed use. So we're really comprehending that families who are struggling with housing stability aren't just struggling with a mortgage or a rent payment. They're struggling with childcare payments. They're struggling with transit fees and those things. So we're trying to comprehensively address the housing instability. But you also see us doing things like density bonuses. We recently did increased heights so that we can, go as high as you want. We did the affordable housing overlay, where if you're willing to deed restrict even one unit out of a few, you can get extra density out of us. So we're trying to do, we're really emphasizing the carrots, and making sure that it's as enticing as possible. We understand the nature of, not as well as developers want us to, but we understand the nature of interest
We
rates
think you're
and
perfect, so it's okay.
just Salt Lake City.
Well, Brandon, as a segue here, as a private developer with a passion to be creative, to provide essential housing to the community, what is available to developers today to provide capital A affordable housing that's government regulated and pure market-based solutions to providing affordable housing?
Well, on the capital A affordable, you have your traditional sources like low income housing tax credits, which is a federal program, which is actually probably the mainstay where most affordable product gets delivered. Utah also has a lot of loan programs, both community and local, like Olene Walker, which is a huge subsidy of affordable housing pieces. Beyond those kind of traditional sets, you have in certain tax incentive programs, like what the state and city has just been supportive of, is the housing transit reinvestment zone, the HTRZ zones, which do have an affordability component to it. That I would say is more the affordable with an A to it. Not many of those zones can actually overlay with federal tax credits because they're not in qualified census tracts. So there's complexity with those low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC credits, that don't always translate over to the HTRZ zones. But the HTRZ zones themselves do have a component of affordability that really create a mixed income, not just affordable units, but mixed income units, which that level of creativity and working with the city to really help define what those are as we're rolling that out really across a lot of the new development areas within Salt Lake City is going to be, I think, a huge boon to affordability and development of affordable units.
So it sounds like there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of players around the table to identify that there needs to be, more creative solutions. Where do you think we are now with quantifying how many units we're creating a year versus what the need is? Like, are we close to matching that, demand and that inefficiency in our housing stock, or are we very far off today?
I think we're far. I mean, I think that we're short all around. I mean, but the issue is when we're growing, if we're not being thoughtful about it, as we talk about ULI trends, where we're going, the amount of market rate units that we've delivered, we've oversupplied ourselves right now, which is a good thing. We'll work through that supply issue, but we traditionally have always been able to deliver the market rate units, and we'll continue to deliver the market rate units. And so I'm not worried about the market rate units from a rental perspective, but with market rate continuing going up, with costs continuing to go up, that gap between market rate affordable and what that really means and translates to average teacher, firefighters, and the like, if we don't have a thoughtful approach and aren't deliberate in bringing up the balance of the community, all of this growth that we have in Salt Lake City is only going to cause further problems of stability because we're not lifting the overall community collectively.
I think the other thing, like we have aspirational goals. Salt Lake City has, certain goals that we've set for ourselves. I know we need 1,000 units to make the homelessness crisis less dire. All of those things are great. We need a cultural paradigm shift. And I say that with sensitivity that all of us have lived outside of this area and, haven't just been in Utah. And I don't want to be the carpetbagger who comes in from the outside. But the truth is, we're no longer a small, just agrarian state anymore. We are the ninth most urbanized state in the nation because of how concentrated our population is across the Wasatch Front. So maybe the concept that everyone has to have a quarter acre with a picket fence when you have mountains that you literally can't build on and box us in the way the waterways box in Manhattan, maybe we need to start considering those things differently. And so when the legislature sets forth that starter homes are 450,000, but land prices are only increasing. And for land prices to decrease, we're all experiencing other economic hardships that make homeownership unattainable. I don't know that we always have the most reasonable approaches to this. We have to battle with that land cost. We can't just conceptualize of housing in the ways we traditionally have. In Salt Lake City, even where density is more smiled upon, we have constituents who get mad at the concept of row homes where front doors don't face directly onto thoroughfares and instead, empty out into lanes or alleyways that we've built in between. And we're going, people are going to be okay if they have to walk down an alleyway to get to the main thoroughfare. But there's a cultural shift that has to happen here too, because even if we enable um, the most density that you can imagine, and even if the state preempts us and everything, you all as developers will still interface with people whose culture just has not come to terms with the fact that the growing state requires different housing solutions than we've historically employed. And if we try to employ only what we've historically seen, there's no way affordability can be part of the conversation.
So being that you're on the front lines and you're interacting, with that need every day, what are the unit types that need to be built? Are they studios and one bedrooms? Are they 2 and 3 bedrooms? Are they apartments? Are they townhomes? What is the best place for developers to think about supplying that need?
Everyone is obsessed with the missing middle concept, the village concepts, row homes, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes. I went to grad school, as like 97% of the United States did, in Boston. And so we all watched how in Newton they
I mean,
take those.
two-thirds of this panel,
Yeah.
I didn't go to grad school in Boston, but excuse me.
I did not love the Red Sox, so I'm still New York.
Hey. 2 championships when I was there. So.
but we watched in Newton how they took those beautiful old Victorians and they responded to a new demographic. They responded to a new financial reality by splitting them into duplexes and triplexes and quads. We have an unnatural deficit here because in the 90s, actually leading up to the Olympics, they downzoned Salt Lake City. So a lot of what would now be naturally occurring affordable housing that we could do that to just doesn't exist. The stock isn't there. And because comparably our land prices are so much less than other places where developers have been, they scoop that up and then redevelop it just by knocking it down. So I think it's kind of a delicate balance that we have to strike with that. But I think everyone in municipalities, the guy who wrote the Missing Middle book came to the league conference. We're all obsessed with that.
Fair. Well, I think that's a good segue here.
He's actually a ULI friend of mine. So he's on my desk at ULI.
I wish I knew his name. Sorry, Missing Middle guy. You impacted me.
That's a good segue here because, Victoria, you've lived around the country. Brandon, you used to be at a private equity shop doing deals all over America. What precedents have you seen in other metropolitan areas that have been successful in market or public-based affordable housing solutions?
I think what we're trying to tap into right now. I mean, ADU units, being more creative on the unit type, being a little bit more flexible in zoning, upzoning, density. That's really been a key thing in some of the markets like Boston, New York, and those other places. Tax increment financing or tax reimbursements like the HTRZ zone, but matching the time period of the reimbursement to the actual, affordability constraint. You really have to match those very thoughtfully, but it does put, in the 90s, we don't have this amount of production being done, so we don't have the affordable stock now. If we do the 15-year, tax rebate or 25-year, whatever you want to match the tax reimbursement to that restriction, then all of a sudden now you're building forward what that affordability, natural recurring affordability stock is going to be. And so those type of things, I think there's been a lot of municipalities that have done it. And waiver of impact fees, and really things like the HTRZ. I mean, impact fees are, hate to take money from the city. City needs it. City needs funds. We already have plenty of issues there. But that's one thing that hits the bottom line right away, and you don't lose a lot of those dollars in the capital stack. Where in HTRZ, it's nice, but you still have to build the whole capital stack and get the reimbursement, or else you're losing a lot by bonding it, paying finance markets, a certain amount of that percentage. And so some of those dollars don't translate all the way into the affordability, where more of the public infrastructure dollars or, either impact fees, or where I've seen, like in Memphis, one of the big things that they do is parking. That's the biggest thing. Land and parking are the two things that, developers can't control costs on, and they're necessary. I think we'd all love if parking just went away, and you could imagine that it wasn't away, but every development starts with parking. So if we go into communities where we need affordability, or we're going into these massive redevelopment pieces of scale, the city's really the only one that can, in scale, help address this from a neighborhood-wise or community basis. And the communities that have done that and kind of led ahead with parking or waiver parking requirements and really built like around HTRZ zones, they've had, I think, a bit better luck in getting ahead of the curve on that affordability component.
I think for me, it all comes down to how creatively we use the land, and that's kind of where my lane, right? The zoning and the planning concepts. When we did our anti-gentrification study at the city called Thriving in Place, it really was shocking to me. I had never conceptualized of how land scarce we are. I think that the fact that there are mountains gives us a false sense of security, whereas when you're in Manhattan, those rivers are undeniably the boundary for where you can build. And so we have to appropriate that sort of thinking and use land differently. So my parents are just now seniors. They had me very young. So they're just now seniors. But, in the Carolinas, they live in a place with zero lot lines. So they still have their cute little house and their little chihuahua can still go out in the backyard while they open the door. And, they don't have to live an urban lifestyle when that's not what they're used to. But the land use is being maximized in that context. And so for me, we're pushing as hard as we can. And I will say this for my co elected officials, even throughout the Salt Lake Valley and beyond, this really is something that Utah is trying to do well. If you go to Eagle Mountain, if you go to Saratoga Springs, if you go to Harriman and Bluffdale, you'll see there's townhomes all over the place. But again, if the price of land goes down, we are all experiencing an economic crisis that makes buying a house the not that big an economic issue, right? Like where people are going to be more focused on
Mhm.
survival if land price, that means that the big one has come through and wiped out our infrastructure. There's been an international devaluation of our currency or something terrible. We don't want those land prices to go down. So we're going to have to be forced to get more creative about how we interact with that land.
Well, Brandon, to spur material supply of affordable housing, it seems public-private partnerships have been effective, like HTRZ with the tax increment financing. What would you envision in your dream world's affordable housing policy to be to stimulate your real estate development peers to engage in creating the supply?
Oh, that's a really good question. Dream scenario. Well, I think how I break it down is there's really those big cost increments. So we talked a little bit about land cost is a big one. The only way we can't really drive land costs down outside of you can change the land cost per unit, and that's just density. So you can address that.
Which can also have a consequential effect on your hard cost per unit. So it's not
Which
necessarily
it's not a
linearly.
one to
Yeah,
one. It's
yeah.
not a one to one, and it depends on what type of units you're doing. You would ask not to go back, but you asked, do we need more studios? Ones, two, three. We don't need more studios. We don't need affordability by design because we just keep cramming smaller and smaller units. There's a livability factor that we have to consider in this, and people just because they're a teacher, firefighter, they're not making the Goldman Sachs money. It doesn't mean they have to have an inferior living type of situation. So we need to be very conscientious about that. And we need more 2 and 3 bedroom and even 4 bedroom units. I mean, we're a city, a state of families. So we needed some more of that, family oriented product, whether it's townhome, whether it's splits, whether it's flats, whether even more dense apartments, but with larger unit sizes. My dream scenario, honestly, in affordability, because you talk about the cost of land, you talk about parking, but really you have 2 major other costs. It's your hard costs and it's your labor. Those are 2 big things. So I think the only way we can really get aggressive and ahead of it is we start looking at technology that can help us kind of bridge those gaps, which maybe goes back to family business growing up, modular housing. If you can manufacture housing, if you can drive those hard costs per unit down, that is one way you can start to stem the tide. If we can get a little bit more forethought on that, but it's really hard for the private sector to do that on its own. It's something that I think we need to lead out with the public-private partnership, because there's a lot of people who are doing modular, and then you eat up all the savings in transit. So if we want to solve it for Utah, we need to be looking at solutions in Utah to build up the modular pieces. But the nice thing is it's a twofold system because you also have labor. Within a factory type environment, you bridge gaps that exist in language, you bridge gap in background, you bridge gap in skill set. So training programs that exist within a factory environment are much different than on a job site. And that way you can also go through training programs of people who otherwise didn't have skill sets, and if you become plumbers, become electricians, be able to climb themselves their way out of that poverty cycle. It's a double bottom line benefit. So a lot of people may shy away from modular. It's not an easy task to solve, but it is something that I think we in Utah collectively, if we can lead out in those initiatives and get a true public-private partnership to be innovative on that front, I think that will have a much more exponential effect on how we can approach affordability, both of driving down costs of labor and hard costs, as well as building up the employment base and the labor pool that we have really a lack of right now.
And on the triple P side, with HTRZ in place today, is that sort of the main tool that developers should be looking to create capital A affordable housing?
HTRZ, I'll be, it's helpful. I don't think it's a full solution. I mean, I think you're still going to have to be fighting on the LIHTC and pulling into federal programs. The great thing about Utah is we do have low property taxes. And so reimbursement of those property taxes is helpful, but it's not a solution in and of itself. It doesn't solve the whole issue. Really, we're doing a project in South Salt Lake, and we're going to be able to deliver 500 affordable units. No offense. I feel like I'm cheating. We're my first project outside of Salt Lake City proper. But they've done a really fantastic job of working with us both on the land acquisition of turning a site they identified as being mission critical for their master plan redevelopment. And they're partnering with us on both HDRZ funds to support the affordable housing. We're layering on the LIHTC, we're layering on Opportunity Zone, and they're also layering on a contribution to the parking. So we're pulling every tool that we have as a developer. They're pulling every tool that they have as a municipality.
So that wasn't off the shelf. That was you approaching the city saying, this is my vision. How can we work together to create a bespoke program to effectuate this?
And honestly, I give it a lot of credit. It was South Salt Lake that was leading out on it. They were approaching us collaboratively and sought us out. And so we were able to work with them collectively to be able to come up with something where
That's amazing.
Everybody has to put every tool they have on the table in order for us to work together and solve this. I don't think developers can do it on our own. I don't think cities can do it on their own. It really has to be a collaboration between the both.
So Victoria, to that extent, it seems, that if there were off-the-shelf solutions, that there were programs in place or that were financeable by the private market that met the municipality's goal, that might be the most effective way to spur supply. So what would need to be required in Utah to affect policy change to provide more of these off-the-shelf programs that developers could tap into to fill that need?
I think we need to be left alone. With all love to my legislative friends, not only do we have preemption come in to tell us what we can and can't do, which sometimes is helpful because, like the HTRZ, we needs the tax increment that stacks up. It's not just ours. But this last year, if we could have dedicated all of our time and attention to affordable housing and the priorities we saw, which would, for us, is alleviating homelessness through the creation of housing stock, we would be in a much different place. But we're dying death by 1,000 paper cuts in the city. We have the authorities, which are not creating new revenue streams. They're reappropriating old revenue streams to priorities that are determined by people outside of our city. So we end up losing tax increment and just basic general fund dollars that we could allocate to this. We also lose manpower time. So I think we have the most intelligent people. You've worked with Tammy Hunsaker. She might be the smartest person in Utah when it comes to housing policy and making things happen. If we could give her the time to focus on this and to create that panacea that would work, we could do it. Instead, we've dragged her into hockey and the possibility of Major League Baseball. We've dragged her into Station Center. We're now under the microscope because we put it in bike lanes, right? Like, we need to be left alone is what we need to do, right? Like, we need chances to be what we are. The state has every year since I've been here and before put housing policies in place. And every year a new legislator has to put their mark on it, it feels like. And so we're not putting in policies, testing them for a period of 2 to 5 years, collecting data on them and saying where was success, where wasn't, how do we modify? We are every year saying it didn't happen quick enough. Do this, do this, do this. And it's, it's diverting our attention in ways that are not sustainable.
To create an off-the-shelf triple P program, can a city do that by itself or needs the state as a partner in order to effectuate that?
I mean, the CRAs, what used to be called RDA, the Community Reinvestment, it's not redevelopment anymore, it's reinvestment. Yeah. It's one of ours.
It's CRA.
It used to be RDA. I mean, that's technically that, right? We also have real estate specialists, who are well versed in this. I also got to work with former Congressman Ben McAdams, and he and I went and we consulted with massive cities like Austin, Atlanta, Cleveland, Annapolis, Maryland, and we were able to help them leverage their real estate assets through public-private partnerships into revenue generating ventures that also solve problems. So Atlanta wanted 20,000 units of affordable housing in 8 years, and our work with them helped them get closer to that. Cleveland wanted to create assemblages so that they would be competitive with the other Rust Belt cities to attract, and we were able to do that with them. So I think, there's things, definitely tools we're leaving on the shelf that I wish we would bring. It's really frustrating to be able to do this for the city of Austin and not be able to do it for my own city because I can't get momentum here. So
How did they get momentum? Like, what have you? From both of you, what have you seen
I
around the
was able to
country?
be a salesperson instead of a co-counselor.
Okay, sure.
When you come in and you say, "Here's this idea," and I don't represent an ideological threat to you, and there's no political, no political tensions, it's a lot easier for me to go, "Look, I'm in the same boat as you. I stand in the same crosshairs with my constituents. I'm dealing with the same developers breathing down my neck like you are. Here's a path forward." It's a lot easier when there's no political tensions. When I'm there, I'm just one of 8 elected officials, 7 who deliberate on the same body as me, and it's hard.
Brandon, is there a private lobby movement in Utah right now for affordable housing?
I think there's a lot of people who are very well intended. I think there's a number of folks that have gotten involved in the private sector. I think everyone, at the state level, the community level, understands it's an issue. We're not all rowing in the same direction. I think that's one of the biggest issues of rallying behind, because affordability looks different if you're from Utah County versus West Side versus Salt Lake, versus Logan. I mean, we're a broad state. We're very diverse, and so from a state perspective and even some a leader perspective, there's just not a one size fits all type of approach. And I've met with a number of very well intended folks. It would be helpful if we could coalesce around a direction and start working collectively towards that same end goal. I think we'd end up getting a lot more momentum and a lot more success. But it does seem to be that there's a little bit of competing egos and factions that just doesn't accelerate as well as I think it doesn't optimize as well as I think we could.
And could we embrace our position as an emerging market? Like San Francisco is always going to make the mistakes because they're always the first one into whatever's going on. We get to be the emerging market. We don't have to even make the same mistakes that Austin made. Like, and we have some of the best minds here. We've got Dehan at the uh, Gardner, thank you. And then we've got the Sorensen Impact Institute. I was on a team that did this. We have the best minds. If we would all just, I don't know, do a lit review and like read a white paper together. And this is where I wish the state would be more proactive and take more of a regional approach, right? And really, without preempting cities, build focus groups and task forces that would say, this is the best practice that we're aiming for. The people who come to us with the best ideas that approximate it, these are the incentives for you that you can have.
And how do you, I mean, that wouldn't be a one size fit all solution. So Salt Lake City is going to have different problems than Provo, and they're going to have different problems than St. George. So does this become more of a tailored solution per the municipality, or do you think this comes blanket from the state that sort of accommodates all these different cities and municipalities together?
We are
That's
a
a really good question.
libertarian
Yeah.
dream world.
I think
We're in a safe space now. The dream, Brandon.
I think it does come down to municipalities, but I think it's like what Harriman needs is they need more townhomes. They need to be forward thinking in what they're developing. It doesn't need to be all 1 acre lots, as they're redeveloped. But I think a lot of those smaller cities are being thoughtful about that. They are doing the master plans up front. They are looking towards some of those other precedents of how do these cities develop over time, because it's not a slow growth. This is meteoric of what Salt Lake City is going through. I think really though Salt Lake City, because we are the capital, maybe with South Salt Lake, with Ogden, the greater Salt Lake Valley itself, we're the ones running out of land. We're the ones, the greatest population growth, from an absolute number is happening. Utah counties, continue to grow. They're not at that same breaking point. We're at a different kind of piece of that, that growth curve. We're on a just slightly different trajectory. So I do think it's different by municipality, but I think it does lead out Salt Lake City. The way Salt Lake City goes, is the way Utah goes.
I also think there's an element of the culture war cannot have a voice here. Just because Salt Lake City, if I say deed restriction, because I'm Salt Lake City, because I'm counter majoritarian politically, it will be not heard in the best case and derided at worst. If I remember the day I heard Jake Anderegg say it, and he said inclusionary zoning. And I was like, wait, are we allowed to put those words together? It was so exciting to me. But, the culture wars can't be given a foothold in this. This is actually a crisis of not just a test of our humanitarianism and us wanting a quality of life for our neighbors, but also our economy. I mean, I don't know who's going to dig the trenches for what's coming out in the inland port if we don't have people who can call this home.
So, Brandon, question to you. So, before I moved to Utah, did a lot of New York City real estate, and there was a 421A program in the city where basically the city would give you a 20% density bonus, which you were already building type 1 anyway. So having that density bonus didn't have that great of a incremental per unit cost on your construction side. You would set aside 20% of your building at 80% of AMI, and you would get a 30-year tax break. So they basically created a program where if you wanted to develop rentals in New York City, you had to go into the 421A program because there's about 100 basis points of spread on your return on cost to go into that versus building market rate. In our market, we are going to have different groups of developers, some that might be more impact driven, that if a deal's a tie by going into an affordable housing program, they'll do it. We'll have some other developers that, might have more impact driven capital, that even if affordable housing has, dilutive returns, they'll still do it. But we probably have a decent chunk of developers who would need to be incentivized to want to go into that program. How do you think about what that resultant needs to be of any policy? And what does that spread need to look like, or that benefit need to look like to get every developer to embrace building some levels of affordable housing in their projects?
I wish I had the answer to that. That's a great question. No, I mean, I think you are right. I think you first identified the problem is that, we're giving more density when we're already maxed out in, 5/2 wood construction. Market rates not there, affordable rates aren't there to really be going high rise. And so the density, give is not fantastic in like the urban core. Going to 185 feet, you're not going to be able to build to 185 feet right now. We will not too far off in the future. And so I think we need to be thoughtful of it. If tie goes to the runner, I mean, I think you've got to layer it together. I mean, there's not just one panacea just to cure everything. I think you've got to layer Olene Walker. You've got to make it easier to identify what those needs are. You need to lay in Olene Walker. You need to lay in city funds. You need to lay in county funds. You need to also be really working with the banks. There's a lot of CRA banks out there that will give you a cheaper rate if you charge less for people. And I think also developers need to educate themselves on it. It's, there's something about spreadsheet development. Your Excel model, not every unit's going to lease up 20 units per month. If you charge less money, really attack that bigger part of the bell curve, your lease up's going to be faster. Your retention's going to be higher. You're going to be able, some of those other things that sometimes don't always get translated into your Excel spreadsheet that developers need to educate themselves on and really look at the precedents before then to realize they're de-risking their deal by charging a little bit less, layering in on all those creative tools, and then looking at also really, I'm de-risking this because I'm charging, on 30% of my units, I can charge less than market, especially in an oversupply market like we have right now. That de-risks it. And I think you can need to learn how to be able to articulate that and pitch that with your equity groups. And it resonates with folks when you're able to articulate it like that.
Are these from traditional capital sources or non-traditional capital sources that are most embracing that vision?
Traditional capital sources. I mean, if you can show people how, I'll tell you the South Salt Lake project by layering an opportunity zone and the HTRC, and it was the quickest capital raise I've ever had. It took us 48 hours to raise $20 million.
That's amazing.
Because those tools that paired together are really impactful, and surprisingly, equity investors, when you show them those type of returns, are fantastic, and they'll jump on it. But when they figured out, wait, I can make this money and charge people less, it really resonates with them. I had one investor in particular. We're doing the first affordable project east of 7th East in 40 years, medical office conversion up by the University of Utah, putting families, affordable units and families in an area of town that otherwise would never be able to afford to be up in that area. And so it's honestly one of the projects I'm most excited about. But when I told my partner and investor that was a business plan, he was excited. He was like, wait, I've made money my entire career by having to force people out, charge people more, that turnover, that kind of moral conundrum that he would face of like, wait, I've got to do the bottom line. I've got to be a fiduciary. I've got to push for profit. Wait, I can make this type of return and be a good human being and make impacts on people's life. People are generally good. And if you can show them that path and educate them on that path, and even if it's a toss-up, people will generally buy into that. We haven't had a problem with that. Our affordable projects are actually getting more capitalization than our market rate projects.
It's amazing. Sounds like you have an entrepreneur looking to execute the city's vision.
Brandon's the best. You should talk to him about historic preservation too.
No, that's another trend conversation.
Well, as we're winding down, a closing question to both of you. As Utah continues to grow, what are some of the items we should all be mindful of for our urban, societal, and economic drivers as we continue to evolve?
I think it's incumbent upon us who are in the ring to persuade. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world around us. My constituents are reacting more passionately to small things um, because everything small feels big. And so, um, if someone's frustrated with me, they go to the legislature and they say, Salt Lake City is just impossible to deal with. And they encourage a preemption or a law, right? They take this one anecdotal thing. And instead of using the scalpel to deal with this one issue, they bring down a sledgehammer on all municipalities. And once again, they cause that confusion and the distraction. Salt Lake City is the best resourced city. All these other cities trying to deal with these legislative pieces have no hope of keeping up with the pace. We need to persuade one another. That means I need to sit down, and you both have been wonderful with me. I need to understand, as someone who comes from the nonprofit sector, what a pro forma actually looks like. And what does it mean when a developer says, this isn't penciling? Because I will tell you, no one believes you when you say it. Not one person who isn't in your sector believes that it doesn't pencil. They think when you say it doesn't pencil, it means that you have to get like the 16-foot yacht instead of the 20-foot yacht. And so, like, we need to be persuasive with one another. It is incumbent upon us to communicate and to reach meaningful understanding. When we are saying 17 feet on a safety gate is required, and you're saying that that literally cuts into my density and makes my costs go up, we need to be persuasive as to why we need that, or we need to be receptive to the information that would change that. And we need to be thoughtful about ordinances so that they aren't overly prescriptive, but they are protective. And I just think no one persuades anymore. At this point, everyone has their agenda. And whether the agenda is politically to crucify a developer, because that's really popular in a lot of places, or it's, financially to just throw someone under the bus so you never have to ask permission again. You just be like a battering ram on your projects. None of that's going to work long term.
So what works? So I am Jane or John Doe developer, and I want to approach you about being thoughtful. What does it take to persuade you? What are the facts? What's the backup you need to see to understand the truth behind the situation?
I need a real conversation, one that doesn't infantilize me, nor show. I hate when people are councilwoman. Stop. You can call me Victoria, right? But like one that
Can I
we're
call you Vicky?
only you. um, but uh, but like we need. There's no trust typically between developers and municipal leadership. You all think we exist to make your life more miserable and expensive. And our constituents are telling us that you exist to destroy the communities that we love, that we were elected to protect. So, what it looks like is a real, honest to God conversation. When someone is talking to me in one headset, telling me, oh, Councilwoman, I would love to show you my new project. I'd love to get your opinion. And then the Speaker of the House is calling me on the other line, going, why are you so difficult to deal with? I'm getting complaints about you from the same developer trying to sweet talk me. That doesn't help anything. That actually just institutionalizes the dysfunction that our state has institutionalized right now. So it's incumbent upon you, if you're coming in, to be persuasive to me, to talk to me, human to human, to do what it is that is required to get my attention. And it is incumbent upon me to be responsive, because we're not getting rid of developers. We shouldn't. You all are the ones who are building what we envision. So, I have to make space, and I work with my co-counselors a lot on this. I have one or two who will say things like, I can't trust a developer. I'm like, you better learn real quick. they're laying foundations out there. So, like, it is reciprocal, but you have to approach with authenticity, and you have to stop. The state does nothing but nuclear options on one another. They go to the Speaker of the House on us. We shut down on, you can't put this here or there, right? Like, it's enough. Just good faith interaction.
Fair enough. I appreciate the honesty. Brandon, what do you think we should be mindful of, urban, societal, economic drivers as the state continues to evolve?
Yeah, having moved away for 20 years and really spent a lot of time investing in a lot of other markets that have gone through this similar type of growth curve, I think we really have to be thoughtful and look to some of those other markets. We talked a little bit about this a number of times, but we have to look towards those other markets that we can emulate, but also understand where they misstepped. Because there's a lot of other markets that have gone through this same kind of growth curve. And we're in a very unique position because we're trailing that, and it's coming. I don't think you can't stop the growth from coming. We got the Olympics coming. We've got the population growth, job growth. I mean, we've got a tiger by a tail, but if we don't collectively come together to really thoughtfully think about what the next 10, 15, and 20 years are going to look like for us, and we're just reactive to what's right in front of us, we're going to miss a great opportunity to do something really unique. And we're going to end up with the same kind of problems that we've seen, Austin facing, Portland facing, San Francisco facing, if we're not careful. And I think a lot of that comes to communicating collectively together. I think it's working collectively as a private sector and public sector, and it's understanding that we're all Utahns. We're all Salt Lakers, as I love how the mayor says. We're all Salt Lakers. Whether they're facing homelessness right now, whether they're at the 20% AMI, 40% AMI, or they're 180% of AMI. And we've got to be able to build a community that will lift all of us together, that we all take advantage of this growth and this opportunity that's in front of us. But it really takes mindfulness, it takes deliberate action, and it takes people that collectively as a community, which I think our development community can do and should do and hopefully will do, really lift our neighborhood collectively together as we move forward in this growth experience that we're all hopefully be able to hopefully continue to be able to have. So,
well, speaking of growth, last question, we'll bring a little levity. Utah Hockey Club, Mammoth, or Outlaw? How do you vote?
I mean, Yeti, but we really fumbled that one. I don't know. At this point, does it matter?
Brandon?
You're talking to the wrong guy. There's a lot of things I do decently well. Branding is like the absolute worst one. I mean, I couldn't even brand my own company, Blaser Ventures, for the first 4 years. And I mean, it took us that long. So I understand Ryan's, dilemma. I'll be honest. I thought, are we honestly the Utah Hockey Club? And I've been to a number of games and I've seen the gear. It's kind of grown on me. I've got to be honest.
And I like the Jazz Bear doing double duty.
Yeah,
it reminds us that we have a basketball team because the hockey team has not left room for us to remember that.
I just want to live my childhood dream, call it the Outlaw, so I can wear my black cowboy hat to every single hockey game.
If it's not Hockey Club, if it's of the two actual name, I would go with Outlaws.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate the support. Well, Victoria and Brandon, really appreciate taking the time today to talk about such an important issue that's near and dear to all of us. Thank you, audience, for joining the first ULI Utah Trends podcast series. Look forward to seeing you November 12th at the Hyatt Regency for our conference. I'll be following up soon with our second podcast in this series. Thank you for listening.